the political addicts who prize short-term power over long-term dignity and liberty are the ones who now dominate the nation's conversation, and their story is roughly symmetrical. You're getting victimized by the other team. The things that are wrong are coming from the politicians on the other side. The nation is in decline. Give us more power, for we alone can fix it. On the left, media personalities and activists often weirdly and ahistorically denounce the idea of America itself, calling the founding racist and our institutions unjust. To them, our history is exclusively a story of victimhood and a narrative of oppression. There can be no redemption, no progress, and no hope. Political zealots on the left don't see much of anything worth conserving in America, and if you disagree with them, it must be because you're an irredeemable, deplorable, clinging to some phobic, backward-looking vision. There's no possibility of honest disagreement. But on the right now, too, victimization is a story we trumpet. Demagogues denounce the idea that there could be anything left to conserve in America. According to these zealots, we lost the idea of America long ago, and it's naive to think it could be recovered. Much better to burn things down than try to rebuild. Cynicism is supposedly cool. They shout that persuasion can't work, and the left will turn us into their victims if we don't stop them first. Persuasion is a crutch for the weak, for those who are too cowardly to fight. The particular policy agendas obviously differ, but ultimately the message of all politics first, folks, is basically the same. The only way to put an end to the culture war is to move beyond the outdated idea of a limited constitution and instead grab more power for the good guys while there's still time. The left's plan is more unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. The right's plan is now to give similar kinds of power to a strongman. But ultimately, there's not much difference between these so-called plans. Anti-pluralists are against dissent, they're against minorities, they're against diversity, they're against place, they're against liberty and human dignity. The factions differ on who should be Caesar, but beyond that, there's much on which they agree. They salivate on the idea of chaos in our disrupted age that can be the excuse for seizing more power. They foment anger and fear because they think if we're angry and scared enough, we'll assent to some Caesar as solution. These factions are dangerous, to be sure, but here's what we fail to appreciate most of the time. They're factions, and they're small, and they command nothing like majority opinion. When they appear to win, what they're really only doing is putting together a temporary majority coalition of folks temporarily more disgusted by the other side's arrogant overreach. That's why every midterm election, or almost every midterm election for 3 decades now, we've seen a new president, 2 years into his term, lose the Congress. Why does this happen every cycle? It isn't because the Congress is suddenly popular. It's because the president, who usually won a lesser of two evils election in the eyes of the American public, then populated his White House with foolish folks who believed that they were elected with some sweeping mandate to transform America, and they prompt a backlash. It's also the single most obvious and important explanation of what happened in 2016. Historians are not going to look back on 2016 as about who won. What happened in 2016 was a race to the bottom by statistically the 2 most unpopular majority party candidates in the history of polling. One guy won simply because he was the 2nd most unpopular person in the history of polling. Go to any corner bar, a supermajority of Americans already know this. By the way, we roughly did the same thing again 4 years later. Forget the nonsense about a new FDR administration. America elected a new guy because they were sick of the old guy. This is also the most basic and obvious explanation for the crap show that's happening at the other end of this building right now. Nancy Pelosi's party quite obviously lost a referendum on the stewardship of the House of Representatives 60 days ago. But no one won, least of all Kevin McCarthy. Nobody in America is crying out for ambition's sake. So let's restate this overreach and repulsion hypothesis in a more positive way, because it turns out the American people are quite ahead of the political classes. It turns out the American people don't like political addicts. They don't like political zealotry. This is good news. To quote one correspondent to my office literally this week, quote, "The Senate today reminds me of a lunchroom full of insecure adolescents trying anything and everything to get attention. Not everybody, of course, but the loud ones. But most of us eventually learn to grow up. Let's hope that someday the electorate kicks the Senate out of its extended puberty by letting folks know that mooning each other really isn't that cool, close quote. Nebraskans have a way with words. Stated with a few less naked butt examples,